In 1982, Neil Zeiger, the producer of the BBC's respected Play for Today strand, had noted the popularity of the time travel episode The Flipside of Dominic Hyde and its sequel. It encouraged him to create an experimental spin-off called Play for Tomorrow. 6 episodes were made and broadcast in the same time slot as its parent show. 6 writers were given a video showing a panel of experts discussing what the beginning of the 21st century might hold for Britain, and then asked to write a TV play. Today we're talking about crimes. Hello, and welcome back to Very British Futures, the podcast about UK science fiction television. And we are beginning a special mini-series examining Play for Tomorrow, the 1982 anthology of speculative plays about what life in Britain would be like at the dawn of the 21st century. Joining me in my cosy nuclear survival bunker is Rod Brown, host of the Nostalgia Tours Doctor Who podcast.
Hey Gareth, I'm very well indeed, thank you very much, and it's a delight to be joining you tonight.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to have you. Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting. It's something a bit different tonight.
Well, I don't know your opinion on this yet, and you don't know my opinion on it yet, so yeah, could be interesting.
Crimes was written by Caryl Churchill and directed by Stuart Burge. Broadcast on Tuesday the 13th of April at 9:15 p.m. In his home office, Melvyn, a psychologist, is reviewing his last group therapy session with a set of prisoners. He shows them a video statement from Jane, a successfully reformed arsonist, thanking Melvyn for explaining her motivations and helping her change. Amongst the group is Ron, convicted of trespassing on government property, and Rufus, a political activist. As he watches the recording, Melvyn's wife, Veronica, tidies the house and tells him she's invited their friend, Larry, over for dinner. Melvyn seems uncomfortable about this. His work over, they watch the scheduled broadcast of Protect and Thrive, where cheerful presenter Smith explains how to build and maintain your nuclear bunker, and how to protect it from other survivors with a firearm. We now realise that Melvyn and Veronica are living in such a bunker despite the suburban decor. Larry arrives and makes polite conversation. It's all very sensible. How much were you aware of Play for Tomorrow and indeed its parent programme, Play for Today?
I was very, very aware of Play for Today. I have to say, I have absolutely zero memory of Play for Tomorrow. So this was 1982 this series came out. I mean, back then I was watching anything that had a science fiction tag on it. I would absolutely have been watching it and looking out for it. I was a fully card-carrying, signed-up sci-fi nerd. Obviously, primary love being Doctor Who, but absolutely I would have known about this and I would have watched this. I have to say, though, even though I've got very, very really clear memories of the 2 Dominic Hyde plays, which obviously preceded that, and I can still remember them actually quite clearly to this day, even though I was thinking about it earlier, I've probably only seen them once or twice since transmission, but I can still see them still quite clearly. This play that we're going to be discussing tonight, I have to say I have zero memory of at all. So whether that's going to tell us something about what I think of this, we'll find out.
Yes, I'm similar to you. I definitely didn't watch it at the time, and I don't understand why, because like you, I was a big sci-fi fan, and there wasn't that much science fiction on television then.
Absolutely. So, Blake Seven had hit the dust by now, hadn't it?
Apart from the odd American import, there wasn't much there. So I can only assume I was terribly shallow, and because there were no spaceships or monsters in it, that's why I didn't watch it, possibly. What was your overall impression then of Play for Today Crimes?
Let's start with the writer, shall we? So this is written by
Mm-hmm.
a lady called Caryl Churchill, who is a very well-respected British playwright. She's known for her works that primarily in the theatre, and they explore lots of sexual politics and feminist themes. You get a tiny little soupçon of that in here, but not very much. There's very little about kind of gender roles. There's a little hint. So I thought I want to kind of find out what other people thought of this and what the general feeling is, because as I say, Caryl Churchill is a well-regarded playwright. She's still with us. So I had a little dig online, and I could find absolutely bugger all online about this. Which is really quite surprising given her reputation as one of Britain's foremost playwrights. It's unusual that this has just sunk without a trace. I'm going to lay my cards out right from the start, Gareth. I really didn't enjoy this, I have to say. And maybe that's why it's not remembered. I find it quite a disjointed experience. It's quite a clinical production. It's a little bit uninvolving, unengaging, a little bit cliched. Yeah, I struggled with this. I've watched it a couple of times in preparation for tonight, but it was not a great watch for me. How about you? Did you?
Well, I would agree. Yeah, enjoy would be the wrong word for this one. I did find it interesting. I think it does a lot of interesting world building about this within, as you say, within these confines of basically two sets. One thing that strikes me about all these Play for Tomorrows is that they're very theatrical. Really,
Incredibly.
actually, it wouldn't take too much effort to transfer that to a small stage somewhere.
Absolutely not. You've been sneaking at my notes because that was one of the things I wrote down in big bold letters at the top. Absolutely, it doesn't. It really wouldn't take much at all to. In fact, I think it could pretty much go on direct as it is to the stage. It wouldn't need any more moderation at all, I don't think. I mean, the one thing that struck me is this is not a play with a single driving clear narrative, is it? It feels much more like a series of vignettes and monologues. It doesn't tell a cohesive single story. Yes, it's giving us, as you rightly say, there's doing some world building, and it's giving us the world of 2001, or should I say, the space year 2001, as seen or extrapolated by Caryl Churchill. But it is very staged. I mean, I've got to say, even though we do get an awful lot of these monologues, there are two framing devices with it, which is quite interesting. The first one being the group therapy session, where all the prisoners are talking direct to Melvyn, the therapist. But then you've also got this secondary one, whereby Melvyn is watching a recording of the session in what we presume to be his home to start with his wife Veronica in the background. And so you kind of get that play within a play feel to it there. And again, you could easily do that on stage, maybe a little bit more difficult when he's watching himself, but a little bit of clever staging wouldn't take too much to translate that. But yeah, so you get that play within a play. I mean, again, I will quote Doctor Who. It's got that kind of Vengeance on Varos vibe, doesn't it? Where you've got the two Arakaneta watching events on. Sorry, everything has to be translated into similes to Doctor Who.
Oh, well, one thing about this podcast is that Doctor Who, even though we never cover Doctor Who per se, it runs through everything else. Like, it's the DNA.
Absolutely, as it should rightly be. Although I've got to say, this felt in many ways more like an episode of Terry and June or The Good Life, but without any humour whatsoever. It's very 1970s suburban life, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about that play within a play. You've got long conversations with Melvyn and his wife talking about keeping ferrets, and she goes on to name what the male, female, and offspring of a ferret is called. Very, very obscure dialogue that we've got in some of these places. How do you want to tackle this? I mean, I thought it was quite helpful because we do get these series or these series of vignettes or monologues. Should we take them one by one as they crop up through the play?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So I think the place to start is with Jane.
Jane. So Jane gets us off to a start. Now, Jane is not a character in the prison therapy session. She's being viewed by the prisoners and Melvyn, the psychologist, on a screen. So she's presenting her story to us. It's shot very much like a like a monologue screen. It really reminded me of things like the Alan Bennett talking
Mm.
head plays. Now, I was quite shocked when I looked up. They didn't come along until 1988, which was quite surprising because it very much had that kind of feel to it. But the camera is so focused on Jane's face. Her face pretty much fills the frame for what's almost 15 minutes. So it's quite a bold way of telling a story. You assuming that your audience is going to stay with you for that monologue. But what we learn
Mm.
about Jane, we learn that Jane was addicted to drugs. What is she? She's 18, 19 at this stage. She'd become addicted to drugs as a teenager. She'd killed her parents and then burnt her parents' house down. She's killed, as she says, some other people, which is gloriously vague. She's turned to prostitution and mugging. She's living on the streets, but she still keeps this. She talks to herself, or she refers to herself quite a few times as a spoilt rich kid. So that's kind of her background, or that's a shortcut to her background. But we learn that she's kind of become renowned as this serial killer, but Melvyn's, well, the police have found her anyway, and Melvyn has put her through a program of shock therapy treatment, which has worked on her, and she's now got an electrode implanted in her so she can be traced by the police at all times. So that's that's our story.
And she clearly enjoys telling it. I mean, she's someone who I suspect seems to enjoy the attention.
Very much so.
It's quite a this. There is some humor in this play, and this is, I think, one of the humorous parts in a way. It's almost kind of like a satire on counselling. She now understands that it wasn't her fault she did any of these terrible things. Sort of like it was all down to her upbringing and her parents and society. So it's kind of a parody almost of that kind of rehabilitation versus punishment.
Absolutely. And she delivers what I found odd, and certainly at odds with the rest of the performances in the play. She delivers her dialogue with this real kind of knowing wink at the audience all the time. It's almost like kind of Monty Python nudge, nudge, wink, wink, isn't it? It's quite a mannered performance, the one she gives. And that's why I say, well, I get the feeling of kind of Alan Bennett or even a Victoria Wood. You feel as though she's delivering a comedy performance, even though the lines aren't per se humorous. There's no comedy, there's black comedy in it, but they're not laugh out loud comedy. But she delivers it with such a kind of knowing look. I kind of almost got Kenneth Williams vibes a little bit with the oohs and the ahs. It's quite an extreme performance, I would say, which is very much at odds with the other performances in the play, which are much more, I would say, naturalistic, but let's go with TV naturalistic.
I would say that, yes, it's a much more arch. It's Sylvestre Latouzal playing Jane, who's a splendid actress. I've seen her in quite a lot of different shows over the years.
And of course, you saw her as the little girl in The Mind Robber in 1968 with Patrick Troughton when she was 10 years of age.
You know, I've completely forgotten about that one. I was thinking more of her turn in Between the Lines. She was a regular in that. But yeah, it is like I say, it's a bold to just concentrate on almost one camera for nearly 10 minutes. I mean, even in 82, that's quite extreme.
Absolutely, it is. And there's some odd bits of dialogue in it which show that this is a product of its time. So she talks about Melvyn's apparent work with clones. So she's trying to dismiss the naysayers who have derided Melvyn's psychiatric works. But there is one really, really uncomfortable line where she talks about she understands that Melvyn has been associated with aborting transsexual babies, she says. And she said, oh, that's fine. If a woman doesn't want to birth a queer, she doesn't have to. To say I was cringing at that point when I listened to that would be an understatement.
It's incredibly violent kind of words there.
Absolutely. And it shows a complete lack of understanding of the subject matter that she's referring to. All I will say is that it was 1982. And maybe opinions were a little bit less enlightened than they are now, thank goodness. But yeah, that really, to me, that was quite shocking. I don't think that would have been shocking necessarily to an audience back in 1982. Probably the word transsexual is probably quite unknown to them, I would probably suggest, in 1982. But yes, it sits incredibly uncomfortably now, and is probably, for me, the most shocking moment of the play. But as I say, that's in hindsight, not as would have been at the time.
It's a speech that's full of red flags, really, and the fact that Melvyn doesn't either is kind of ignoring them tells you that's already telling you something about him.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I do not get the feeling that she is, air quotes, cured. She talks about being cured and rehabilitated, but you very much get the sense that that is not the case. But she smiles so happily when she's talking about the crimes that she's committed, and she seems so gleeful in them in the way that she delivers it, and talks about loving the attention that it got her. She seems to love the notoriety of becoming known as a serial killer. So yeah, I very much suspect that she would be back on the streets, doing the evil deed without too much difficulty.
Move on to this one, who is Ron.
Ron. So now we come back into the prison therapy session and we meet Ron, and we get another, what is effectively another 15-minute monologue. So the first half of this play is pretty much back-to-back two one-on-one monologues. Now, in this situation, Ron is talking to Melvyn, the psychiatrist, but I don't think, apart from one or two very brief cuts back to Melvyn, the camera holds on Ron, and Ron is talking again directly to the camera. So we are taking Melvyn's point of view. So again, you get that full one-on-one Ron looking down the eyes of the camera, looking directly at us and telling his story. Now, again, his crime is very different, I have to say, from Jane's. So Ron talks about, he sets the scene by talking about that he was born in the city, but he craved for the countryside and fresh air. He talks about his first countryside experience when he was a young boy and how he grew to love it and became a casual labourer on the land when he left school. And then that moved into him protesting against industrial development and conserving nature. And through this, we come to realise that what his crime is that he wanders onto restricted areas of land, whether that's he talks about a food manufacturing plant or an army training land or just private land. And in doing so, he gets beaten up or attacked by the various guards who are guarding these various establishments. But he believes, and what he wants is freedom to wander in the countryside.
And it's very telling that he can't do this, and that his punishment is to be put in jail. We don't know about what his sentence is, but it seems a very extreme punishment for what seems to be a mild bit of trespassing, which again tells you something about that all is not well in the United Kingdom.
I would like to know how you get from wandering onto private property to being imprisoned. I feel as though we're missing a little bit there that would give us better insight into this world. It's left to us to kind of put those pieces together, but the kind of joining between the two of them isn't given to us. It's not spoon-fed to us. So I'm left with more questions than I'm given answers. And yeah, absolutely, when I compare it to Jane, who's committed multiple murders, and this guy's just wandered onto private property, clearly the two things do not equate to each other. They're not of equal stature. But I'm missing something. There's something not quite explained there. I don't feel satisfied at the end of his monologue that I've really got a clear understanding of the world he's in and actually what really he's being punished for.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's part of the point of it, is that his punishment is. I mean, his story. I mean, it goes on for quite a while. It's basically adding a little bit more in detail to this, that we're in a very regimented police state. You get one line I made a note of when I was watching that I particularly like is when he protests, "Save the whales! I wanted to save the butterflies."
Absolutely. I mean, what is apparent as well is there are plenty of leisure areas for people to go. So, and again, that kind of dilutes it for me a little bit. So he talks about the kind of the areas that he can go to, and there are bars and there are pubs and there are outdoor spaces and there are countryside rambles and walks and plenty of space for people to go. But what he's hankering for is to go to the areas that he's not allowed to go to.
I sometimes get it. I get the impression possibly that those places, those official places are possibly a bit too basically like parks, or possibly in their way they are too regimented. It's
discussion about pubs being there and bars being there, people drinking, when it's supposed to be a countryside setting. That was a bit, again, that kind of told me a little bit more possibly about this world.
yeah, I don't have that too much to say about Ron, to be honest. I mean, he's sort of like,
It is odd that we go from an extreme crime to what appears to be a mild misdemeanor. But again, we don't know the full detail. Has he been, what form has this protesting taken when he's gone onto private property? We don't know.
and then we get another nice contrast, because Ron is he's not inarticulate, but he's not a great speaker. Then we move over to Elliot, played by Rufus Collins. Oh, I should have added in that Ron was played by Peter Whitebread,
who I believe is a very accomplished stage actor. Again, I was looking up his CV. I wasn't particularly familiar with him. It was not a face that I recognised, and he's done an awful lot more stage than he has done film and TV.
Yes, similar here. He wasn't a sort of a familiar face, and to be honest, neither is Rufus Collins, who takes over the story then as Elliot. Now, Elliot is very articulate. I mean, his monologue is almost like a little mini play in itself.
Yeah, he's definitely got a lot more life to him. I found this one a little bit strange. So Elliot doesn't want to talk about himself at all, and he makes that very clear to Melvyn, despite Melvyn's frustration, because he wants to talk about him. And as we find out later on, Elliot doesn't particularly talk to his wife about his crimes either, and she becomes equally frustrated when she visits him in prison. So what instead he talks about is his neighbour, a lady called Mrs. Drake, who he describes the 67-year-old great-grandmother. And we come to learn that Mrs. Drake's crime was that she opened her front door against police instruction when there was some sort of a fray going on in the street. It takes quite a while to tease out what she's actually done, but that's the nub of it. And Elliot has got beef with this to a degree that she's being prosecuted and she's accepting her crime. So again, we go back to the name of the play. But he feels that she shouldn't be punished in a normal way. She should be seen as a political criminal because she's denied the authority of the police. She stood up to law and order. And that leads through to his argument about himself, that he believes he should be seen as a political prisoner as well. And in fact, to the extent that he wants to go on hunger strike to protest about not having recognised as political status. But the interesting thing is, we never learn what he's done, which is very odd. And that's why I start getting to this point of the play and the wheels start coming off a little bit for me. I don't want the world to be, painted in every colour, know absolutely everything. But this is so obscure. You're desperate to know a little bit more because, you say, he's incredibly articulate. The actor delivers the speech very well. It delivers the monologue, with passion and verve. But I want to find out what his crime is, as I think most people would be. So the fact we completely skate over that and never find out what his crime is quite frustrating.
To some extent, yes, I can see that could be frustrating for some people. It didn't bother me too much, I'll be honest. I just seem to accept that he's been that he was a political activist. Whether he'd been publishing a newspaper or protesting or something. I get the feeling that's kind of where he's coming from. It's also interesting that Melvyn's reaction to him, because I get the impression that Melvyn would rather be surrounded by lots of Rons, that he could lord it over to some extent. And with Elliot, he's someone else who's very educated and you can sort of meet Melvyn on a bit more of an even footing. And clearly, Melvyn doesn't like that.
And Elliot's got far more passion and force about the way that he talks. He's much more demonstrative than Ron is. As you rightly say, Ron's quite rambling and introvert, whereas Elliot is very assured in his dialogue and in his delivery.
That's it. I mean, we're talking about Melvyn. Melvyn, played by T.P. McKenna, that fine character actor who's he was very good at playing sort of authority figures who have clay feet. It's a strength of his. What do you think of his performance in this?
I mean, obviously, I'm coloured because I'm thinking of President Zarkov from Blake 7 Series 1 Bounty, and I'm thinking of Captain Cook from Greatest Show in the Galaxy because I'm very narrow-minded like that. But no, I think I like his performance. I really like T.P. McKenna as a performer. I'd like to have seen a little bit more light and shade in his character, but I think that's more to do with the writing rather than the performance. I think he performs as he always does. I've never seen T.P. McKenna give a poor performance. But I think there's, again, and we'll come to it in the last section of the play, there's not an awful lot of places for him to go with it. We see a bit more of his character and his interactions with his wife that we'll come to in a minute, which is the final section of the play. But certainly in the confrontation or the discussions with the prisoners, it's fairly flat. There's not an awful lot for him to get his teeth into.
Yeah, he's kind of just there being very smooth.
Sorry, I was going to say he's got a perfect voice for a therapist as well, hasn't he? He's got a very calm, smooth voice that really kind of draws you in.
And we just get these sort of hints that he's not as benign as he seems, and the fact that he's here in this prison, sort of pushing his method, and those little glimpses we've had of him sort of reviewing his work back in his home, and he's quite sort of pleased with himself, really, about most of it, and how.
And I think that information that Jane talks about earlier on, when she almost equated him to almost like a Dr. Frankensteinish type character, experimenting on clones and unborn babies. Is there some truth in that? Again, we don't know whether there's any truth in that, but it does leave some questions in the audience's mind, I'd suggest.
Basically, we had these three monologues. It's been very stagey so far, and then we pull back into the home of Melvyn and his wife Veronica. Now
it's Harry and June territory. Veronica, she's played by Julia Foster from Orphan 55. And she doesn't scream Benny once. Where's my Benny?
And she does. I mean, she's got a fairly cliched part to play.
Very much so.
So just the kind of suburban
middle class to upper class wife, concerned with looking after the husband, pouring the scotch, talking about going to play tennis. Yeah, it's a fairly thankless role, isn't it?
That's true.
And her fighting against Melvyn, because she's the one that originally seems to be quite keen on bringing Larry into the relationship, but she backs down very quickly. And again, that felt a little bit squandered.
That's it. There's not really any conflict there, but I suspect maybe there perhaps was an earlier draft, and then it gets cut out because it's not quite in the theme of the. There's
a lot to fit in, isn't there? I do wonder whether the first three monologues needed another monologue of that ilk to round off the kind of crime and punishment theme, and the nuclear survival storyline with Melvyn and Veronica almost feels as though it's a separate play altogether.
So yes, to some extent, or possibly that might have felt a bit too sort of Captain Kirky to sort of have a summing up at the end type.
Possibly.
I could almost see that they could have been watching some sort of parody of Terry and June, covering some of this sort of building a bunker material. I could see itself lending itself to that, but as it is, yes, they are very sort of 80s suburban kind of couple, and it's nicely done because that it's only slowly, I think, you get the realization about where they actually are.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, you don't get that. So Veronica turns on BBC. Oh, sorry, she turns on Channel 5. It's called Channel 5, but it is a BBC channel. So the Demons had BBC 3. This has got Channel 5.
I was going to say, yeah, this is one of those shorthand ways they used to say we're in the future, because the BBC had more channels.
But she's watching a DIY show telling you how to build and how to maintain your nuclear shelter.
this whole sequence, the DIY, I mentioned that Jane's monologue is kind of blackly comic, and this is the other sort of blackly comic element of it, which is this presenter called Smith, who's cheerfully telling us about how to survive in a nuclear holocaust.
Some really odd choices from a production point of view in this section, though, and I think that kind of took me out of it. So, as you rightly said, Smith is presenting what's ostensibly a DIY show. I'm sure you've probably seen clips of a guy called Barry Buckley from the 1950s who used to do DIY shows in TV's very early days.
Yes.
He was always wearing, pinstripe shirt and tie, terribly, terribly proper, as people were on television in those days. And this guy reminds me of a kind of Barry Buckley type. The way he talks to camera, his delivery, his phraseology, everything about it. And that kind of takes me out of it because we're supposed to be imagining this is 2001. And yet the delivery and the way that the whole television program is presented to us isn't even 1982. It's a throwback to the 50s. So it feels a really discordant style. So I think that stylistically, it feels so at odds. That took me out of it quite a little bit, I must admit. And I started to lose a little bit of patience with it at that point.
I don't know if it was a deliberate intention of Caryl Churchill and the production team to do it in that style, or whether she kind of just thought as a writer, this is because, like you say, it's instantly recognizable as a certain style of TV program, and maybe she was going for that to kind of accentuate the disturbingness of what he moves into.
Absolutely, but it is quite. I just find it a little bit odd, seeing as we're supposed to be projecting. We're living in what's effectively a fascist state moving forward. But he tells us, we've got to have board games and take your cassettes to listen to on your cassette deck. They don't extrapolate what we'll be listening to very much in 2001. So that all seems quite. I'll use the word normal for a minute, and then it suddenly starts twisting a little bit, doesn't it? So the first sign that something really is a little bit odd then is when Smith, the presenter, opens the medicine cabinet and shows that all your drugs that you need to fight against anthrax and botulism and rabies and diphtheria and everything else. And then we see Veronica back in her shelter go and open her cabinet, and she's got exactly the same style of cabinet with all her medicines in there. And I think that's probably the first time we twig that Veronica and Melvyn are also living in a shelter and not in a just a regular 1970s or 80s suburban property.
I think that's a nice touch, that, and it's like that's the point where we're starting to go over the cliff, so to speak, with this revelation, because then Smith, who played by Dave Hill, produces a gun, and now he's talking about in a very cheerful and sort of blokey way. He's talking about killing your neighbours.
Doesn't Jeremy Clarkson do the same usually? It's not far removed from him. Yeah, absolutely. He's telling you how to mount your machine gun on the top of your nuclear bunker and load your panel up with bullets to shoot any intruders that come at you. It's again quite discordant, but I think that's purposefully discordant. As you say, it's done in a cheery voice, and yeah, it almost looks ludicrous, doesn't it, the way it's portrayed. I don't think the production helps that, because the way they open a very wobbly panel in a very wobbly side of the set to put some bullets into a little hole, and you're assuming that's loading up a machine gun, it looks quite comical. I mean, it doesn't sell the effect terribly well. So again, whether that's purposefully done to make mockery of it, I'm not sure, but it doesn't sell the world terribly well at that point.
Yes, that's in somewhere where they've largely avoided going for futuristic things. Yeah, that seems an odd moment to decide, we'll make this bit a bit futuristic, by.
But it's the least futuristic thing you could possibly come up with. It's basically a hole in a wall.
Like you said, I agree with you. This is not a story, really. This crimes. It's more a series of questions and statements and building up this world. I was looking up an interview with Caryl Churchill, and she said it's not the job of playwrights to provide answers. We ask questions, and I think crimes is a very good example of that. So, and it depends how frustrated you feel by this approach.
We've got the other last bit of the denouement, the last piece of the puzzle, haven't we? So throughout this story, when we've cut back to Melvyn and Veronica in their house, they've been talking about Larry, who is this third person, this missing person. And the conversations are, again, quite obscure. I thought to start with that Veronica was suggesting that Larry become part of their relationship and that they have some sort of polyamorous relationship going forward. Melvyn describes him as he's been his best friend for 15 years, but Melvyn clearly isn't very happy with Larry becoming the third wheel in the spoke. So you don't quite but it's not clear actually what's going on there. And at this point, you do realize what's going on. It's that Larry basically wants to come and join them in the shelter so that he's got somewhere to hide from impending nuclear war as well. And Melvyn very quickly talks Veronica out of that by quite selfishly saying, well, if he joins us, there's 50% chance less likely that we survive because there'll be less medicines for us to go around. So let's just forget Larry, at which point Veronica's quite happy to drop him. But then, surprise, surprise, doorbell goes. No, it's not Terry and June. It's not the vicar come round. It is Larry turns up. And again, it feels, Larry comes in, Donald G, by the way, from Monster of Peladon and Space Pirates. Old Donald G turns up in the last couple of minutes. Again, he's a really well-known face. So just to come on for what's effectively, 3 minutes of screen time at the end?
But he makes a lot of it because he's very good at being a bit shifty. I mean, he makes a good antagonist, and I love that little that little scene between Melvyn and Larry. It's where and Veronica, where you've got this big unspoken. They're very good at, without saying it, they're very good at. You know exactly what's going on in this final scene.
Absolutely. He is hinting very heavily that he wants to join them there, but they are doing everything to avoid it. So they talk about, let's all go and play tennis. Yes, let's go and play tennis. Do you want a glass of scotch, old man? It's all that kind of conversation to get away from the real issue that's at hand, because Melvyn and Veronica have already decided that Larry is not welcome and that he will not be surviving or selected. He's going to be left on the outside, and they're having the place to themselves.
And you might well, and if the worst comes to the worst, they're gonna have to shoot him. So I like how it ends. I've come round to it. I think the first time I watched this, because I've probably watched it 3 times now, this play, I think I was a bit more frustrated with it the first time round, but now I quite like that kind of ambiguousness, or rather, well, it's not as ambiguous as some of the plays in this season, actually. In that
he's going to fry, poor old Larry. But I think one of my other problems with it is we are sold by the title of the piece that this is about crimes, and that has slowly got watered down as we've progressed through the play. This last piece, which is effectively the last quarter of the play, has very little to do with crimes. The only link is that Larry keeps making the jibe at Melvyn that because of crime, he can afford a nuclear shelter as privileged and as luxurious as got. So we get the old, crime clearly does pay, ha, ha, ha. But apart from that, there's no exploration of crimes. And if that is what the author's setting out to do, I think that's again why I felt a very anticlimactic ending. We started with a clear crime and we've ended up with no crime at all, but some world building. So again, what are we actually trying to present here?
I suspect it is the way we start off with some obvious crimes, and then by the time we get to the end, it's like huge crimes are being, countries and governments are committing huge crimes, and the characters in the play are kind of going along with it. And I think there's that sense of everyone's culpable of this, the bigger crime of nuclear war, and potentially, although at the risk of sounding like Rick the poet, it's potentially it's the audience as well, in a way that we're all a bit complicit. We're all finding ways to live with the bomb rather than getting rid of it.
Yeah, and absolutely was very prescient in those days, wasn't it? I mean, this was the period that we were all being told to unscrew our doors and hide under our doors at time of
Mm.
nuclear winter and put a blanket over the table and hide underneath it. So yeah, I mean, it was absolutely in the ether at this time.
I was thinking about it. Really, it wasn't intended as such, but that "Protect and Survive" leaflet and the campaign has been massively influential on pop culture of the
Absolutely,
time. It's
absolutely.
we strangely owe it quite a lot, that leaflet. So what do you overall do you, I mean, we've mentioned the guns and the hole in the wall. What do you think of it overall as a in terms of a production?
In terms of the kind of look and set, it's difficult to judge, really, isn't it? Because it is so small scale, really. Jane
Mm,
does her monologue from a very suburban looking set. Obviously, we have the suburban looking set for Melvyn and Veronica, and then we've got a grey, fairly bland prison set. There's not an awful lot to hang your hat on. I do find some of the
mm,
sci-fi elements, shall we say, where they do sci-fi it up a bit, it feels a
mm.
little bit kids' TV. So the medicine cabinet with the writing in what 72 point writing on everything, it kind of kills you. It's a little bit crackerjack. And as we talked about earlier, when you're loading the bullets into the wall, it doesn't feel like they've necessarily given an awful lot of thought to the realism of the sci-fi. There's nothing there to tell me visually this is 2001. And I don't want everyone wearing crazy fashions and Ray-Ban spectacles, but there's nothing there particularly to tweak me into it. The costume design, the set design isn't particularly avant-garde or particularly trying to do much. I think it's the words that carry the performance rather than the actual production itself.
I'd go along with that. I mean, they've got a big TV, which is one of the signifiers of the future. I'd say in the early 80s, which
BBC Five has got a very Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy ident at the beginning of it.
we've got the fisheye lens, which we know denotes sinister, and things are afoot. Nobody ever looked at nobody ever looked at anything happy with a fisheye lens, really.
Absolutely. Big Brother, here we come. And I like the fact we do get lots of, there's lots of little teasing glimpses through the dialogue about the future. So we hear about,
Mm.
for example, they talk about the Great Depression of the 80s. And, when you think
Mm-hmm.
this was written in what, 81, 82, well, it came out in 82, so probably written tail end of 81, 82. Given that at that time, there were mass riots going on in this country, poverty was on the rise, unemployment was hugely on the rise, racial and social discrimination was hugely on the rise. I think it was probably a fair bet at that point to think that we were heading towards a Great Depression. Obviously, life changed and money became king, and the growth of the yuppie is not kind of
Mm.
seen here at all. So Caryl extrapolated that the future is going to be very bleak. She talks about Britain only having 2 million people in work at any one time. So Elliot, I think one of the earlier guys, he said he was a computer programmer. He said he's never had a day's work in his life, not for the lack of trying. It's just that so few people are employed. We talk about prison overcrowding, which again, is relevant today. They talk about in 1996 streets were no-go areas. So there are all these little hints, but they're just thrown away in some of the monologues. I don't think we get the necessarily full blown. And in some ways, that's nice. You get those little dropped in moments because I suppose that makes it feel a bit more naturalistic. But I can't necessarily equate that with the sets that I'm looking at. Again, it feels a bit of a jar. I'm looking at a Terry and June set and hearing about the Great Depression of the 80s and 90s. It just doesn't
Mm.
doesn't quite hold together as a production for me.
Yeah, it's definitely not as polished as the flip side of Dominic Hyde and its sequel, which I thought looked very good for its time. But these all seem to have been done on a fairly standard budget. I think overall, I mean, I'm going to ask, have you seen the rest of this mini series
I
of
haven't. No, that's a
plays?
joy yet to come.
All the rest of the plays, I would say, have got a similar kind of style to this one in terms of production. There's there's one called Shades that actually feels like they've gone futuristic, because funnily enough, people are wearing futuristic sunglasses and sort of shiny jumpsuits and all
All
that
very
side of
tomorrow
it.
people.
Very tomorrow people in style, whereas all the rest of them are basically 1981 with the odd computer in the
And
corner.
I wonder if that's done intentionally, because obviously this is for a pure adult audience as opposed to the likes of Doctor Who or Blake Seven, which were more for a family audience. So maybe, and there was always a snobbery about science fiction at the BBC. So maybe they thought if they went too sci-fi that it wouldn't resonate with a adult audience. You only did that for, the kid is at home in the good old BBC patronising way that they thought about these things. So yeah, maybe it was done purposefully so that you didn't alienate that adult audience when it came along.
That could well be it. Certainly, Play for Tomorrow. I don't think it doesn't feel like a sequel to Out of the Unknown or anything like that. It definitely feels more like Play for Today. It feels more it's a show about politics and it's about life now rather than sci-fi ideas like time travel or robots or anything like that. All the themes are much more rooted in the here and now and unemployment and the bomb.
Yeah. And so, overall, did I enjoy it? I probably, like you, first time less so.
Mm-hmm.
Second time, probably a bit more, probably because I knew what was coming. But I still, because we've got this series of monologues and they don't necessarily progress, it's not a progression. We jump from completely different things. And as I say, by the last quarter, we end up not really discussing crime and punishment as a subject matter. I absolutely take your point that we're looking at
Mm-hmm.
potentially societal crimes in a wider context. But I think we lose that. I would have liked more of a build, more of a progression. We just get these little snapshots, and it doesn't, for me, necessarily hold together as a cohesive whole. So I end up thinking I'm not quite sure what she's striving for. It feels a little bit too weak and a bit too scattergun to be making an attack on the politics of the day. The extrapolations of the future are a bit too thin. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily work for me. I just think it's a little bit too unengaging and uninvolving.
Well, I think that's a very good summing up. You've already answered sort of like my last point, which would have been a summing up, but I think that's a pretty good one. Is there anything before we move on to the important subject of Rod Brown? Is there anything you've not said about the play that you wanted to say?
I think we've probably covered it all, to be honest.
I think we have. I think moving on, I would love to find out about your future projects at the moment, Rod.
Thank you. Well, I've just recently launched a new Doctor Who podcast because, crikey, you can't get enough Doctor Who podcasts, can you? So I've launched a new Doctor Who podcast called Nostalgia Tours, where myself and two guests every episode discuss a range of stories. We visit them via a good old bus, similar to Delta and the Bannerman, and we go and review 4 Doctor Who stories. And we find things that, if we travel back in time, things we might change, things we might tweak, words that we might have in ears of writers or directors or actors that we might swap out for somebody else. And look, it's a daft little conceit to talk about Doctor Who, isn't it? And all of us enjoy doing that. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I've had some great guests on. Hopefully, you will be a guest in the future. But yeah, it's great fun. Yeah, thoroughly enjoying it. So a time of recording, we've got 2 episodes out there at the moment, but they're coming out weekly at the moment. Probably go fortnightly during the summer, but at the moment it's a weekly output.
Brilliant stuff, and I really enjoyed the first one.
Fabulous, thank you.
It worked really well, and I would absolutely love to be a guest on the show in the future.
Absolutely, you're very welcome.
Well, it only remains for me to say Thank you very much to Rod Brown for being a marvellous guest. And thank you very much to you at home for listening. And look forward to talking to you again soon when we look at Bright Eyes. Very British Futures is hosted and produced by Gareth Preston with special guest Rod Brown. Music by Chattery Art. If you can take a moment to rate us on your podcast app, that would be much appreciated. You can get in touch with the podcast via Very British Futures Podcast at gmail.com. Follow us on X/Twitter at FuturesVery, or visit our Facebook page or our website at westlakefilms.uk Very British Futures. This has been a Phantom Frame production.